Well, we're going to be in the book of John this morning. Got to mix it up for you all. You guys got too comfortable in the book of Luke. So we're going to mix it up. We'll be in John chapter 19 this morning. Just recently, probably a few weeks ago now, we had to replace our motor in our garage. And it was nice because this was like a 15, 16-year-old garage motor. So it wasn't as fancy as some of them they are today. One of the nice features of this motor is it tells me there's an app attached to it, and it tells me whether or not the garage is being opened or closed. And I love this feature because if maybe I'm alone, I'm certain I'm alone in this, but I get to about halfway down the road as I'm leaving, and I'm like, did I close the garage? I'm sure I'm the only person in this room who has ever done that. And it's probably 8 out of 10 times I'm down the road, I'm like, did I do it? Sometimes I'm real confident in my abilities, and I'm like, yes, I did, and I turn down the road. Other times I'm like, I don't know. So I turn the car around, only to find out that I did, in fact, close that garage. It's annoying if you think about it, and that's what I would consider, and I use this phrase probably 100 times this week, it's a minor inconvenience to have to do something like this. Another thing that I was thinking about that some of you might be able to relate to, and for those of you who have driving children in your home, this is a joy that you get to enjoy that some of us have not. Kids these days are ridiculously busy. I'm not sure if you knew that or not. They have about 1 million activities. I was thinking about that just this morning. Elizabeth has like 1 million things on her plate. She's literally not even in this state currently. That's how busy she is. And I'm like, when I was her age, I don't even know if I left the house outside of my neighborhood, riding around on my bicycle, falling down, getting my shoelaces caught in the pedals. Was that just me? Probably. Right? So kids are busy and just trying to remember these things. But the minor inconvenience comes like this. When we're halfway to our destination, Elizabeth's like, I think I forgot something. And it's like, oh. So I got to turn around and go back to wherever I was going, to wherever I was. I hear some slight amens over here, right? Those are, again, what I would consider minor inconveniences. And I was thinking about that this week, and you're probably wondering, dude, where are you going with this? Let me share. We're going through this journey of Jesus on the cross, and we're speaking about this, and we're going through as we prepare for Easter. And one of the things that I think happens to us with these minor inconveniences or even big inconveniences is we often almost immediately put the attention on ourselves, right? Something happens and it's like, man, I am inconvenienced. I have to do this. I have to do that. And then when we look at Jesus on the cross, never up until this point has he said I or me or anything of that nature. Instead, he was always focused on other people. And we're going to see that super clearly this morning. His attention was not on self, but it was on others. And that's instructive for us because we're going to see here in our sermon this morning and how important it is for us to have this outward mentality versus this inward mentality. And before you think about, well, it's easy for you to say trust me, I've been preaching to myself all week long, because this is not an easy thing to do. So I want to read this morning. I'm going to start actually with a reference, because I want us to kind of tee this up a little bit, because it's super important that we understand Jesus' purpose when he came on earth. And I want to read for you Mark chapter 10, verse 45 real quick. I was actually trying to get Ethan to read this. That's what was on the form, but you didn't see it. But Mark chapter 10, verse 45 reads this way, "For even the Son of God, or Son of Man, came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life for a ransom for many." This is a beautiful reminder to us that Jesus came for you. Jesus came for me. Jesus came to serve. Jesus came to die. That's incredibly remarkable when you understand who Jesus is. And we see this already in these first couple of weeks that we've been in this sermon series. We've seen that Jesus, just last week, he gave everybody an opportunity for salvation and a chance to be reconciled through the example of the thief on the cross. And thinking about that situation and that whole interaction, there was the man on the cross to his right and to his left, and only one of them decided to follow Jesus even in his final hours. But we're going to see, of course, another one. Just a couple weeks ago, of course, we saw that he gave people opportunity and he said, look, forgive these individuals. They know not what they do. And for Jesus to look at them after they nailed him on the cross to say, forgive them. What a remarkable thing that we're seeing there. This morning, we're going to see another example, this selflessness that Jesus gives out through an example, through this third word of Jesus that we've been going through. So we're going to be in chapter 19 of John. We're going to read verses 25 through 27. They will be on your screen with you as well. So chapter 19, verses 25 to 26. I swear to you, somebody changes my open book every time I put it down. My little bookmark was in the book of Acts, just a few pages over, and I'm one of you's messing with me, I know it. Verse 25, but standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. And when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, Woman, behold your son. And then he said to the disciple, Behold your mother. And from that hour the disciple took her into his own home. I'm going to find out who did this, by the way. Did what? So we're going, again, we're inching our way through these 7 words of Jesus. And if you haven't been with us in a while, what we're doing is we're going through these 7 phrases that Jesus spoke while he was on the cross before his death. And the next word is actually a 2-parter. Before you correct me, it's a 2-part word, but it's related. So, of course, we see the woman, behold your son, and then the second part is behold your mother. So there's this 2-part, but they're obviously connected. And I don't know about you, and I start to think about things, maybe you're similar, but as I looked at this, I was like, there's a few questions I have about this. So I wanted to kind of get some of these questions out of the way so we can hopefully focus our attention on the message itself. So here are some questions that I think are interesting enough to at least share with you here. First thing I think is interesting, and gentlemen, I don't recommend you use this as you're speaking to your wives or any of the ladies in your life, but why did Jesus call her woman instead of mother? If you think about it, men, if we were to say that to our loved ones, I can assure you it would not go over very well. Woman? Right? Here's what we have to understand. Today in 2026 in Tucson, Arizona and similar areas, absolutely probably not the appropriate designation for your loved one. However, culturally and historically, there's an understanding to be had there. And it's interesting because, of course, every commentary I read this week has to address this. So I figured it's probably important enough to address it here as well. Contrary, of course, to how we would accept that today, the modern woman would accept that greeting, it was actually an endearing greeting in those times. It was actually endearing. So if I do that, it's actually endearing. I'm joking, I wouldn't. Here's what the old Irish writer and scholar Adam Clarke said. He said it this way, and I'm not going to do the accent just like I told you I wasn't going to do it last week. Here's what he says. It conveys no idea of disrespect, nor of unconcern, as been commonly supposed. In the way of compilation, man and woman were titles as much of respect among the Hebrews as sir or madam would be today. So it was more of a formal greeting than it was a probable disrespectful. So others theorized by him, instead of saying mother or anything else, instead of saying that, it may have actually caused her probably a lot more pain watching her son on that cross getting ready to die. So others have this theory that, hey, maybe he didn't want to hurt her with that piercing word mother as he was getting ready to go. Another question might be, and this comes up often as well, is where was Joseph? You might remember Joseph. Joseph was her husband. We don't really know anything about Joseph outside of a handful of references early in the Gospels. We don't hear about him after the boy Jesus was in the temple. So we don't know what happened to Joseph. Most people agree and most people assume and presume that he was already dead by this point. He was likely much older, and therefore he was probably already gone by the time this event happened. Her age We can theorize based off the historical context and the historical information we have about the women who married during that time, but it's theorized she was probably in her mid-40s at that time, so in her prime. Mid-40s at that time, and what that would do, I'm trying to help out some of the young ladies in this room, right? What this does is it does put her beyond childbearing age, so she would not have remarried based on the cultural aspects, right? So she wouldn't have remarried, so she was likely alone, meaning Jesus looked after her during his adulthood and after Joseph already died. And again, we don't see or hear about Joseph any time after the boy Jesus was found back in the temple after they left him behind. And then another question that comes up is why John, or more specifically, what about Jesus' brothers? So contrary to a very mainline church out there that believes that there were no other children, the Bible clearly states that there were others. In fact, 2 of them wrote books that we have in our New Testament. So if Joseph was already gone, stands to reason that, well, the responsibility after Jesus, the eldest, would go to his brothers. We know of at least 2 brothers that are named. But Jesus didn't give them his mother. So you kind of almost have to wonder why. So there's a few theories, of course, about that as well. We can't be certain. But it could have actually had to do with John just being available. John was present. John was there. Back in Matthew chapter 26, verse 56, it states that after Jesus' arrest, all of the disciples left him and fled. So it's presumed that there were no other disciples that were at the crucifixion other than John and others. Mark 14:50 also says the same thing. Another theory is that John was chosen because he was already very close to both Mary and Joseph, or Mary and Jesus. Obviously, we know that he was called the one whom Jesus loved. He was very close to them. He was present there as well. And it's also possible that Jesus wanted to ensure that John can support her, both spiritually as well as monetarily. So it's believed that John was one of the older of the disciples, so he was already set and he was ready to go and he was well off. But he was also a very mature Christian, and his other brothers did not believe until they saw him at his resurrection. So it's possible that Jesus wanted to do that. And there's also some possible other cultural reasons for this as well. But again, wanted to get that out of the way. If you're like me, I wonder about these things, and I want to make sure that get that out of the way. Hopefully we can shift our minds. What is this message this morning? What are we going to talk about in this message today? And again, I gave you a hint earlier. It's around this idea of love. So here's our main idea that we're going to use to summarize our message today. Even in his suffering, Jesus shows us to love. He shows us how to love, even in his suffering. A few weeks ago when we opened this series, I did make reference to this idea and this understanding that Jesus was focused on so many others even while he was in excruciating pain. His heart was one that we really should mirror. We really should look at his heart as he's dying on this cross and realize this is how he desires for us. So I think everything we're seeing in this series is all instructive for you and I. His heart was drawn to forgiveness. His heart was drawn to ensuring that saving faith was available for others. And here we see his heart was drawn to his mother. And more specifically, his heart was drawn in love. And that's really the action we see here. His love was directed to his earthly mother, Mary, the most important person to him on this earth at that time. And he wanted to ensure she was cared for. And what's really interesting, to me anyway, about this word is that it was only recorded by John. John's the only one who gave us this information. And I think it's obvious to understand why. It was his interaction personally with Jesus. And if the other disciples were not there, it stands to reason that he's the only one who can do this. But I was looking at this and I'm thinking, saying, man, this is sort of a very personal interaction with Jesus if you think about it. This was a very personal transaction, if you will. But I think that's why he recorded it for us, because we can talk about it even today and reflect on it. So I want to discuss some of these things and what can we learn? What are some of these lessons of love from the cross in accordance to this passage? First thing I see here is that when I suffer, even when I suffer, I will put others first. So that's our first lesson. Even when I suffer, I can put others first. And we've seen this already in this entire series so far. We're highlighting this. And when I started this sermon series, I highlighted, man, Jesus immediately focused on others. Immediately did that. And last week we saw that he granted paradise to this crook, somebody who didn't deserve it, but because he placed his faith in Jesus, Jesus gave him access to the Father. And then he sees and he looks down and he sees his mother, which means that she was close enough for him to see her and make eye contact and to speak to her. And I'm Pastor Pat, and if you're going to read this devotional that he had shared with us a couple weeks ago or over the Christmas or the Easter season, you're going to see a little bit more detail of what this looked like and why it looked like that. But she was close enough for him to make eye contact and have this interaction. But she would be alone. She would be by herself. She would have nobody to care after her. So Jesus said, I love you enough, Mother, to make sure you are taken care of. And I'm thinking about this. Oftentimes when we go through something small or big, once again, our attention is focused on self. Anytime, and I'm guilty of this. When I get upset about something, you know what I want to do? Nothing. I want to go hide somewhere, be alone. I don't want to deal with people. I don't want to deal with things. And that's just how I deal with it sometimes. I don't want to do all of that. But Jesus here, dying in his final hours, focuses on his mother, focuses on this other disciple whom he loved, who was present. Somebody mentioned that Jesus actually would have known that John was going to live a long time, and we see this in the scriptures. And maybe that's another reason why he chose John. He knew that John was going to live, so he wanted to make sure that through Mary's life, she was cared for. And it's actually, historically, it's very interesting. There's a theory out there historically that she possibly lived with him for about 12 years. In Jerusalem. And then after her death is when he went out and actually began his ministry. So that's pretty interesting as well. But he knew that there was going to be, John was available. And only he can know that and understand that. But he commissioned John for a very important task. Very important task. And I think that's something that we need to understand, and we have it recorded because it allows us to learn from it and to even apply that into our own lives. So the idea here, and my challenge to you is are we going to think of others when we're in suffering, which is very difficult. And I know I see somebody in this very room who did that. I went to visit, and the immediate first thing that they told me is like, hey, how's everybody doing at the church? How's your family? How are you doing? Like, don't worry about me. I'm not here for me. I'm here for you. But others first is one of those things that we can see here. Will you follow Jesus' lead? That's the key thing. Jesus led and gave us this example. Will you follow his lead to put others before you, no matter what those circumstances might be? Next thing we see here is even when I suffer, I will carry out my responsibilities. That's a tough one too. Another aspect of this is that Jesus understood his role, his responsibility as the oldest male in his home. He understood he had a responsibility and a task for taking care of his mother. So I have a pop quiz for you. What is the fifth commandment? Honor your father and mother, exactly. Right? So isn't it amazing that even in his death, Jesus is following these commandments? He's following these commandments. He's still being obedient to this. If it was you and I'm certain that would have been like, we would have forgotten all of the commandments. We would have forgotten all the scriptures in that moment, in that time. Paul in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2 reminds us that not only was this an important commandment, but this actually holds a promise. There's a promise attached to this of long life, of long life and this great thing that comes with it. There's a promise in honoring your parents. Children, write that down. There's a promise in honoring your parents. And it's super important. So Jesus said, I have this responsibility because I'm still present. I'm going to make sure that I take that out and I follow that through. And we have that same responsibility. We all have a role. We all have responsibilities in our own lives. Young or old, we still have those responsibilities. You might be a husband or a father or a son. You might be a wife, a mother, a daughter. And we have responsibilities and roles. If you think about the scriptures as a whole, all throughout the scriptures, it tells us and reminds us that we have a responsibility to work hard, to produce good works, and to honor God in those things. And again, Jesus provides us an example. Living the word that he was, living the word that he fulfilled, living the word that he preached, he's living that out even to the point of death. So again, his example must be our example that helps to push us to continue to do what we need to do. Like I said there a few minutes ago, when I get upset, when something goes on, I tend to shut down sometimes. Jesus is like, no, keep pushing. He says, don't slow down, you got to keep moving. And that's a difficult thing to do. But we can do that. And I think these next couple of examples show us that John's like, okay, Jesus, you're giving me the example. Now I have a responsibility to do this as well. So these next two examples, these next things that we learn here are actually examples that we see from John and how he handled this. And this is the next thing we see here is that even when I suffer, I will be loyal. John suffered too. John was watching his beloved die. John was watching this all happen. And again, we saw that they all left him and fled after his arrest. We saw that just a little bit ago. And it's super important for us to know, hey, John was suffering too, but he remained loyal to Jesus. He was still by Jesus' side, even when everybody else left. And that does mean Peter. And that means some of the others, right? These important men in church history, they were all gone, but John stayed by his side. But there was also 5 others, including John, that were still present. And I'm calling this the Council of Marys, which is very similar to our Council of Steves that we have here at TFC. So it's biblical. Having a Council of Steves is a biblical principle that we uphold to here. Because there was a Council of Marys. But there's these Council of Marys, they were all present, right? We see Mary and Mary's sister, and of course John and the others, and Mary Magdalene was there. But there were 5 disciples that were present at Jesus' death. And that's it from what we understand, from what's been recorded. And I don't know about you, but I'm thinking maybe John was also rewarded for his loyalty. Maybe John was being rewarded for his loyalty to Jesus in this moment. And maybe that was part of the reason. He was close. And I was thinking about this. Every relationship that we have requires loyalty. Every relationship we have requires that loyalty. Right? And we all know the importance of loyalty. Sometimes it backfires on us. I was thinking about you poor Cubs and Bears fans. It's hard to be loyal. But there's a group that's even more loyal than you. Cowboys fans. I was one for a long time. It's painful. But they're a very loyal group. But we all know that it's super important to be loyal in relationship. Very important to be loyal in relationship. I see the Eagles fans eyeballing each other over here. But Jesus exemplifies, he lives out, he tells us, he shows us the beauty of loyalty when it comes to this. And he models it for us here as well. And then finally we see this, even when I suffer, I'm going to act quickly. So Jesus rewards John with his caring for his mother. And what does John do? It says from that hour, he took her into his own home. There was no delay. There was no hesitation. There was no, let me go get my room ready. It was no, I will take you now. And I think there's a lesson there. And I'm sure I'm not alone in this either. But if you think about it, when God says do something, sometimes I'm like, are you sure about that? Anybody else? No, am I alone in that? Are you sure, God? That's what you want? You know what? Why don't you take a minute or two and think about it and then you come back? No, John didn't question anything. He didn't question Jesus. He didn't question his role, his task that he was given. In that hour, that implies immediacy, that implies a right away response. And that's really how we need to respond as well. And in fact, I like I said earlier, I read this piece that John probably had her in his home for 12 years and waited for his ministry, his public ministry, until after this. And what's interesting to that, he understood that part of his ministry in that moment was to take care of Mary. He understood that that's what Jesus wanted from him in that moment, so he said, okay. How many times have we said, you know what, I'm going to put this off until some other time, until I'm ready? When Jesus says do, we have to do. And I think there's a lot there for us to learn. He didn't delay, he gave his all. He, again, what did he say? You are her son. And he said, I don't want you just to watch over her, check in on her every other week. This is now your mother. And John said, okay, God. Okay, Jesus. Okay, Lord. So are we doing the same? Are we treating with care these tasks that God has given us? I'm sure many of us can be like, yeah, probably not. Maybe there's a few things that we can look at and rely on and look at in our lives and say, you know what, I think I need to take more care. I'd be a better steward of what God has given me. I'm sure each of us can think of something that he has ordained for us that we need to take better care of. This is why I said earlier that even in Jesus' suffering, he showed us to love. And I think that's a beautiful thing. He showed us how to respond in suffering. He showed us that love is stronger than even the pain that we go through. And I'm sure many of us have experienced that. His love is stronger than even that. And in these examples that we see of John and Mary, we see that Jesus' love poured into their lives, and then they were able to pour that out into others. And that's really what we're required to do. We need to be pouring Jesus' love out to others. And I think that's instructive for us. It shows us that our hearts and Jesus need to be more outward than inward. And I know that's hard. Like I said, trust me, I've been preaching to myself all week long. It's incredibly difficult not to think of yourself when things are going poorly. When you're too busy to breathe, when you're too busy to eat. Anybody ever be too busy to eat? A little bit, right? Right? When we're so busy we can't do the basic things, we're still thinking about ourselves, because guess what happens when I used to get that way? And unfortunately, when I work at home sometimes, I have access to food. It's not a great thing, trust me. But when I was at work, I used to get mad because I was too hungry, but I was too busy to eat. So what happened? I was still focused on myself, even though I couldn't take care of the food issue. Right? But generally speaking, what we do is that when we're hungry, we eat. When we're sad, we do something that makes us happy. When we're hurting, we do something to take care of that pain. And what's instructive here again is Jesus did these things. Think about it. When Jesus was in his ministry, he went up to solitude and he rested. But what happened most of the time when he went up to rest? They all needed him. He had to go feed 1,000 or 2 or 4 or 5,000 people on more than one occasion. What happened when he went to go sleep and his disciples were out on the boat? This little storm came and was messing them all up, so he had to go take care of them because they lacked faith. So even in times where Jesus is like, I need to take care of myself, what did he do? He took care of others. And I know that's difficult for many of us in this room. But that's the instruction we get from Jesus in this example. Because even when he was suffering, he's like, okay, I'm going to take care of you. And I don't know about you, but that hit me hard this week. It was a very busy week. I actually felt like I wasn't even here last week. That's how long my week was. There was a lot going on. And I was like, I was here. I'm driving in this morning. I'm like, I was here last week, wasn't I? Felt like I wasn't because it was such a long week. But the Bible teaches us to do exactly what Jesus did. While he had requirements in his humanity to take care of things, he knew that his responsibility for others came first. And we saw that all the way back in Mark 10:45. He came to serve others. He came to be a ransom for others. And that was his role. And he knew that and he carried that through. And we're called to put others before self. And I know many of you in this room are super, super good at that. But I also know a few of you can probably use some help. looking at me too. Don't worry. I'm not pointing fingers, I'm pointing. And we see this in Jesus' life, and we see it up until his death. And I mentioned this idea of these minor inconveniences earlier. Right? And that's really, if you think of the large scale of things, a lot of what we deal with are minor inconveniences. I'm not trying to discount anything and everything that people are going through. But it's about how do we deal with those things? How do we deal with the things that kind of get in the way by looking at the example of Jesus and how he dealt with these things? And that's how we need to go through. Looking at his example, understanding how he lived and even how he died, and trying to emulate Jesus as much as we can. That's what he's calling us to do. Let's pray. Father, I thank you, God, for, I would say gentle reminder, but I don't think it was so gentle for me this week. You are a good God, and you reveal things in your word. And I pray, God, that when you do that, that we respond appropriately, that we respond in a way that's honoring to you, that we respond in a way that shows understanding and desire to serve and desire to put you first in our lives. Help us, God, to serve others. Help us to see how you would respond in those situations and how your Son had done so and the example that he set for us. Like I said, God, I know this is it's a hard thing for a lot of us. It's a hard thing to keep up with busy schedules and all the stresses and all the extra activities and everything else. But you've shown us through your Son Jesus how to deal with these things. So help us to do them. Help us to implement these ideas and understandings and these principles that we can easily pull from the Scriptures. Help us to identify those things. Give us the wisdom that we need and the heart desire to do. Help us put others before ourselves and in do so honoring you. We ask that in Jesus' name. Amen.